The problems I had with Hocus Pocus 2, as a diehard fan of the original, Hocus Pocus has become a must-watch during Halloween season, and though there's now Hocus Pocus 2, I have a couple of problems with it as it didn't live up to the greatness of the first movie. Back in 1993, Kenny Ortega brought the fantasy comedy movie Hocus Pocus, which introduced the world to the Sanderson Sisters, Winifred, Bette Midler, Mary, Kathy Najimy, and Sarah Jessica Parker. Although it received mixed reviews during its initial release and didn't do well at the box office, Hocus Pocus is now a cult classic thanks to its annual airings on Disney Channel. On October 31, 1693, in Salem, Massachusetts, Winifred cast a curse right before she and her sisters were hanged that would allow them to resurrect during a full moon on All Hallows' Eve if a virgin lit the black flame candle in their cottage. And that's what happens 300 years later when Max Dennison lights the candle. To survive the night, the Sandersons need to suck the life out of at least one child, and so it's up to Max, his sister Danny, and his crush Allison to stop them. Almost 30 years later, Hocus Pocus 2 was released, but it wasn't the sequel I expected. Hocus Pocus 2 was released in 2022 on Disney+, and it was directed by N. Fletcher. Hocus Pocus 2 took the audience back to Salem to meet teenagers Becca, Whitney Peak, and Izzy, Belisa Escobedo. For Becca's birthday, the friends plan to do a ritual in the woods and are given a candle for it by Gilbert, Sam Richardson, the owner of the old Salem magic shop. What Becca and Izzy don't know is that the candle is the black flame one. Becca and Izzy end up accidentally resurrecting the Sanderson sisters again, who are even more confused but also fascinated by the modern world. Instead of trying to suck the life out of children, this time the Sandersons are driven by revenge, and decide to cast the Najimy Maxima spell to eliminate the descendants of the Reverend who tried to separate them when they were young and take revenge on all of modern Salem. And the spell will also make them the most powerful. If the story of Hocus Pocus 2 sounds familiar, it's because it's pretty much the same as in the first movie. Hocus Pocus 2 relies heavily on nostalgia, and while that doesn't really bother me, it does when that's the only thing the movie has to offer. Hocus Pocus 2 even recycles some of the Sandersons' comedic moments from the first movie, such as their attempts to understand the modern world. The problem is that these don't work 29 years later. Hocus Pocus 2 also doesn't add much to the stories of the Sandersons in Salem, and that's a setting with a rich history that can be used in a Hocus Pocus movie, as the first one did, which leads me to another key thing that made Hocus Pocus 2 not quite work for me, despite being entertaining. Hocus Pocus didn't go into the backstory of the Sanderson sisters, only showing the moment they got caught after taking the life force of Emily Binks and turning her brother, Thackeray, into a black cat, and their execution. Everything before that was a secret until Hocus Pocus 2 arrived, which showed a very specific part of the Sanderson sisters' past. In 1653 Salem, Reverend Trask banished 16-year-old Winifred after she refused to marry John Pritchett, which was seen as defying church authority. As that would have meant being away from her sisters, Winnie, Mary, and Sarah fled to a nearby forest, where they met Mother Witch. The latter gave Winifred a magic book, her beloved bookie, as a birthday present but warned them about casting the Najimy Maxima spell, which makes the user all-powerful. Mother Witch also taught them how to stay young through the life force of children before she disappeared, after which the sisters used their new knowledge to curse the home of Reverend Trask. That's all Hocus Pocus 2 revealed about the Sandersons, but it only left me with more questions about their past. Seeing the sisters all by themselves makes me wonder what happened to their parents, and what they did after cursing the home of Reverend Trask. Also, if Winifred was banished, I wonder how the sisters managed to keep living in Salem, in their now famous cottage, for many more years. Although a third Hocus Pocus movie is currently in development, it's unknown if it could answer all those questions about the Sandersons' past. Disney isn't a name you would normally associate with spooky content, as most of its content is family-friendly, and though Hocus Pocus is also a movie for all viewers, it's actually spookier than it seems. Hocus Pocus has its dark moments that, had it been released recently, it would have been flagged as not necessarily kid-friendly. However, Hocus Pocus knew how to balance its spooky elements with humor, but the sequel didn't. Hocus Pocus 2 has a lot more comedic moments than Hocus Pocus and is a lot less spooky, and it wouldn't bother me so much if those funny moments had landed better. Many of them felt forced and the performances were a bit over the top sometimes, and the moments that could have been used for spookiness were completely wasted, and this complaint leads to another, even bigger one I have with Hocus Pocus 2.I and its tone change towards more comedy. Hocus Pocus 2 took away the Sanderson sisters' evil. Hocus Pocus saw their true evil from the very beginning when they lured Emily to their cottage to take their life force. The Sandersons then turned Thackeray into a black cat and didn't stop teasing and mocking Salem's residents while awaiting their deaths. Once resurrected, the Sandersons used music to distract the adults and cast a curse that would force them to dance until they died, all this so they could lure all of Salem's children to their cottage to take their life force. Hocus Pocus 2 toned the Sanderson sisters down a lot, making them funnier but without the evil that made them so entertaining in the first movie. Even their plan to cast the Magickie Maxima spell was underwhelming and didn't feel like something the Sanderson sisters from the first movie would have done. A huge difference between Hocus Pocus and its sequel is that the latter gave its main characters powers, and contrary to what it might seem, that ended up playing against it. A big part of what made Hocus Pocus so important to me was that Max, Danny, and Allison were regular teenagers/kids, though I confess I support the theory about Allison being a witch, who had to use their creativity and intelligence to find a way to stop the Sanderson sisters. Hocus Pocus 2, however, skipped all that and went on an easier path by making Becca a natural witch. Towards the end of Hocus Pocus 2, Becca, Izzy, and Cassie joined together in a coven and successfully cast the reuniting spell for Winifred. While I love movies about witches and magic, I was disappointed when Hocus Pocus 2 made Becca a witch and also gave her friends powers, simply because it took away that relatable quality that Max, Danny, and Allison brought in the first movie, which showed that anyone could defeat evil if they were creative enough and had the right support system. This connects directly to the point above. Max, Danny, and Allison were completely different, and there was even a considerable age difference between Max and Danny, but they complemented each other perfectly, enough to find a way to save Salem's children from the Sandersons. What I feel ruined Izzy, Becca, and Cassie was the drama the first two had with the latter, who became estranged when she became popular and started dating a boy. It felt completely